So, the agenda, you can see. So what's New Relic? New Relic is the all-in-one web application performance tool that lets you see performance from the end-user experience through servers and down to the line of application code. That's the elevator pitch of New Relic itself. So what it does measure the performance of your web apps. Why do you need that? Your user expects your website to be fast on the back end as on the front end with all the JavaScript frameworks and everything like that. It's more important to look at the front end as well. You should know how fast your website is and how that evolves over time. And if it's slow, then where it is slow. And yeah, get some alerts if there are problems on your site. That's nice too. And not only if your site is down, but if you have errors somewhere in your code and if you get notified by that, that's nice too. So why has a site to be fast? There are some research in that. Google measured if our site is 500 milliseconds slow, then we have 20% less revenue. Microsoft 2 seconds slowdown means 2.5% decrease in queries. I don't know how slow Bing is usually. Amazon measured that with 0.1 second slowdown, they have 1% decrease in revenue, which is quite a lot for Amazon, I guess. Yahoo has a 9% increase in traffic with 400 milliseconds improvement, and Mozilla had 60 million more Firefox downloads because their site was 2.2 seconds faster. So what do you user expect? 47% expect to load your page in 2 seconds or less. 40% will leave your site if it takes longer than 3 seconds, and 27% say, I go to the competition if your site is slow and the other one is fast. The problem you will see soon is, do they mean front-end or back-end time? I couldn't figure that out. So a lot of articles says you should aim for less than 3 seconds, but is that front-end or back-end? What's the difference? Front-end time is when your JavaScript on load event fires. That's how that is measured usually. So including all JavaScript, CSS and everything else, even if JavaScript runs, that has to be run first. Backend is just how long does it take until the last byte of your HTML page is in the browser. So that's my rules of thumb for what's fast. I invented that yesterday.
Sorry, can we interrupt? Our slides are not getting updated. Can it be? We see them change on the video, but we don't see them change on the slideshow.
Strange. Yes, you're right. Maybe. Now, okay. Yes. So, do you see them now? I hope so. I see them there. So for me, less than half a second, it's fast enough on the back end. Less than 1 second, it's kind of okay. Less than 2 seconds is tolerable. More than 2 seconds is intolerable. Front end is, you can see, less than 1 second is fast enough. 2 seconds okay. 4 seconds tolerable, and more than 4 seconds intolerable. That's not the scientific whatever. That's just what I think should be. So, enough of the theory. What can New Relic offer? I have a lot of screenshots, so it has a lot of features. First, what I don't have on the slides is how do you install it. You have to, they provide packages for Debian, Red Hat, whatever you want, and you have to install them. You need to be root to install that, so you can't install it when your sysadmin doesn't agree with you. There are basically 2 packages. For PHP, there's a PHP package, and there's a daemon which collects that information and sends it to New Relic. It's a software as a service. All your information is sent to New Relic. So if your client doesn't like that, you have a problem. But they say it's all safe, of course. So As said, that's the login. Here is for our Liip.ch page. When I click on Liip.ch, I get that. I see the browser load times over the last 7 days, that is, and the backend time over the last 7 days. I see the aptX score, I come to that soon. The throughput, the error rate, and how fast it is worldwide. And the web transactions. Web transactions are which part of your page takes how long. There's a Symfony 2 bundle for that, of course, which just takes your routing name and sends that to the Relic, so you know which part of your page takes how long. Yeah, aptX score. What's that aptX score? You can define how fast your page should be. I defined that to 0.4 seconds, and then your Relic counts how many people got the page in less than 400 milliseconds, how many people got more than 4 times that, so that would be 1.6 seconds, and how many people more, and that's the aptX score. So in this example, I had 1,500 visitors, 1,400 got it in less than 0.4 seconds, 80 in less than 1.6 seconds, and 30 in more than 1.6 seconds. That gives that aptX score of 0.95. That's quite a useful value to see how the experience of your visitors is, how many people get the site fast and how many don't. Then I can click down and see the front-end times for the different sections of my page. Throughput here below, I see some slow queries. So someone had 300 seconds for our start page. I can do the same for the back end. Here I see which part of where it used time. Localhost here is Jackrabbit, because it makes HTTP requests to Jackrabbit. Then I can click on a single transaction which was slow, and I see where did it use how many times. So Jackalope get nodes was this 20%. Translation information was 1%, and so on. I also have the request parameters below. If I collect them, and I could add custom parameters if I want to, for example, add the username. I can then go down more and see, like maybe from Xdebug or XHprof, which part of my code used how much time in that single transaction. It only collects slow transactions, it doesn't collect all transactions. You can define what's slow, but if it's too many, it stops collecting. You can also see the database transactions. That's a Magento installation from Jungfraujoch. So you see which selects use how many times, which are slow. Here's a really slow join, for example. Yes, oops, sorry. You can, the external HTTP calls, that's again from Jungfraujoch, where we do a lot of external calls. Background task, I don't have an example. You can, if you have cron jobs, you can see how much time that needs. Then request time per worldwide location. So you can see which parts of the world are fast and which are not. So if you would target Australia, maybe we need a server there as well. You can also do that for Switzerland, or for many other countries. So in Aargau they have slow connections. And you can also see per browser. Of course the mobile browser are slower than the rest. That's actual time measured on the client and not on the server. That's why the connection time or the network is also important here, not only the speed of your mobile phone. Then really useful is the error monitoring. Every time there's a PHP error, you get collects that. So obviously we have some problems with the newsfeed module on our web page. There's a wrong array there, which didn't get fixed, but usually, especially after deployments, you can see if there's an error somewhere and if there's a new spike, you can fix that as soon as possible. You also get an email if the error rate is too high. You can define how high that should be. Yes, you really see the end user errors, which maybe you don't get in your testing. You can also do your own errors, and then you get informed that. If you click on an error, you get the stack trace, so I know I have to go to feed bundle RSS render line 161, and there's the error. It should be fixed. It is fixed, not.
How is that compared to log Liip Zürich? I mean the gray log compared to that?
Reto asks how is that compared to gray log? It's the same idea, I guess. It's just a different service. As said, you can define alerts. It alerts you if the error rate is too high. It alerts you if the site is down. It alerts you if the responses are too low, too slow. It just sends you an email. Then you can, every time you do a deployment, you can tell it I did a deployment and do some revision numbers or some change logs, and then I can see how fast each deployment was or where we have high error rates. You can add a new deployment easily with a kernel request, so you could integrate that into your deployment scripts so that it automatically makes an entry there. Here's the overview that was before the deployment and that was after the deployment. Not really interesting here. And you also have a so-called change report. You can compare the different transactions to this deployment and the previous deployment. So hopefully those figures go down, the average time. You can have so-called SLA reports, where you can see on which day what the updates was or the average response time. This one, you can do that weekly. That's much more interesting. As you can see, we improved the response time of our website a lot. Then you have availability monitoring. You can define an URL which is called every minute, and if that doesn't answer with a 200, you get an error or an alert as well, and then you see when there was downtime or not, or how much uptime you had in March and February. You have funny scalability analysis, so the x-axis you have how many requests per minute, and on the y-axis you have how much response time that needed. So in this graph you see that it scales quite good until 55 RPMs. You can do that also for database and CPU, but that's less interesting. Then you have web transaction reports, also some figures for the last 24 hours, the day before, the last Monday, 7-day average. Database reports. That's really useful if you fix some database stuff or try to fix, and you can compare to what was it 7 days ago. Did it help or not? We didn't change anything here, so that's not really saying something. Then they have a speed index, so you can compare your site to other sites. That's the Jungfraubahn compared to other e-commerce apps. So here somewhere in the middle. Then you can define transactions. I defined here a transaction for our start page of the Liip.ch, and then you can do alerts on that. You can give it a different app dex. For example, if you think your start page should be faster than the rest of the site, you can define a lower app dex and get alerts if it goes over that app dex. You can also compare to yesterday and last week as well. Then you also have server monitoring, CPU usage, memory, disk utilization, network. We can it collects information about all your processes, who uses how much memory, and CPU. But is a beast on this server. You then also can click on one process and see how much memory uses that over time, and CPU and running instances. Then you can define your own custom dashboards. You have much more metrics available here, and do your own dashboards to easily compare or have an overview of your website. That's just what's the average response time for I don't know what. But this way you have an easy overview and you have much more metrics to choose from than the standard overviews. You can also do notes. So if you want to show something to someone, you can do a note, and it freezes the time you choose. For example, here that's we switched to Memcache for the page caching Magento, and if you look closely, you see that it's much faster. Then they have a new module, the mobile module. I implemented that in our radios app. They have a lot of the same metrics as before. They have some interesting new ones here. From which carrier your customers or your users come. So most use Wi-Fi for the radio app, which makes sense. How many active users you have. As you can see, it's up to 200 users which still use our app. You can see which devices they use, how many active users you have per device. That's the response time per device. And also interesting is the versions, which versions your users are using. There was a new version yesterday, so people start installing that one. What you can't, unfortunately, is what iOS version they use, which would be interesting for targeting your compiling. That's also available for Android, not the radios, but New Relic. Then you also can monitor your Java applications. Then you have some information like heap memory usage and garbage collection time. All that. You can also profile your GVM. I started it once, I had no idea what to do with it, but it works. They also have a Solr package, so you can see how many queries and which queries take how long, and quite useful. Yes, that's the feature set. And what does it cost? There's the light version, that's free. Standard is $24 a month per server, and Pro, which is the best, is $150 per month. What do you get, or what's the difference between those packages? So with Light you only have the last 24 hours, that's useful for alerting, but not much else. Standard is 1 week, Pro is unlimited. You have the SQL stuff, for example, or transaction tracing, code level diagnostics, also only in Pro level. Yeah, we use Pro, of course, as you could see, otherwise I couldn't show you all the features. We have a special deal with New Relic. We only pay $100 a month and not $150 because I didn't answer, and they went down with the price. So. Yes. So what else? There's a PHP API. So you can control almost any setting from PHP. You can also name your transaction differently. You can add custom parameters. You can set your application name. Whatever you can configure it for New Relic. It's also available for Python, Ruby, Java, and .NET. And they promise to have something ready for Node.js soon, whatever that means. As already said, there's a bundle for Symfony 2, so you don't have to name your routing names. They have built-in automatic root name guessing for Magento and WordPress and some applications. And you can also add custom metrics, like for a shop maybe how much money they spent on your shop. I didn't use it until now because I didn't have useful metrics. Some real-world examples. There was a deployment on our Liip.ch website, and we had suddenly much slower response times, from 200 milliseconds to 700 milliseconds. And when you go into New Relic, you see there's much time spent in external web requests. Then you go to the external web services and see a sudden spike in calls to googleapis.com. The reason was we displayed the events from Google Plus on our web page, and that wasn't cached. So on every request we asked Google API to give us the latest events, and then we fixed that, and the request went down. As you can see, I fixed that live on the server, so it was down. There was an error, that's why it's red here. Yeah, you shouldn't do that. If not, das ich bin Another example was for the Jungfrau-Bahn. We improved the InnoDB settings. We gave it much more memory, because we saw that the database was somehow the limiting factor. So that's when we changed the settings. That's quite a difference. That's the server response time for product view in Magento. So that went down from 2 seconds to 1 second after we changed the InnoDB settings. That's the response time for the cached sites. Not everything is displayed here. But also here you can see we use much less time in, for example, log rule info inserts for the cache. If you look at the browser response time, on the back end it's impressive, on the front end it's not that much impressive. The difference. But with better InnoDB settings we of course could handle spikes better. It is better, but it's not twice as fast, of course. You also can see here that they measure what does it need for page rendering, DOM processing, how much time is used on the network, and that's the back end. So if you improve your front end, you can also see what should be improved here, where should you spend your time. Yeah, so I'm finished. I think it's a great tool. It saves you a lot of time to figure out performance problems to make your website faster. It's not cheap, but for a big project it's not that much money, and customers usually pay that money when they see what it can help. And in the end, as I said, it really saves a lot of money and time to figure out how can we do websites faster.